Madison. And what a happy discovery, because people like us are always looking for like-minded allies who are fighting effectively the good fight and have the same kind of values and vision, but are doing different work, much of it. And we've learned a ton from Joe and his colleagues, Catherine and others at Organization for Competitive Markets. And I'm not going to attempt to describe them more because he will. Fun fact I learned just yesterday that in a prior life, Joe actually did a 6-day barista coffee training. So like, oh my God, estás en tu casa, and you are right at home. Here we go.
Outstanding. Well, one, I want to thank Rob and the whole team for inviting us to be here. I'm going to apologize to those tempting Gary here to capture this on a video because I'm a pacer, but he's hooked me up to a cord to limit me. I feel like I'm on a leash here, but that will benefit him as I try to remember we're going to be videoing this. I'm Joe Maxwell. I am the Executive Director of the Organization for Competitive Markets. I am the CEO and President of Family Farm Action, a 501c4 that's aligned with the 501c3 Organization for Competitive Markets. And the previous speaker spoke about the threat around the world and to his and his farmers' efforts with Facebook, Google. We would throw Amazon into that as well. I'm on the board of Open Markets Institute, and we're taking, if you don't know that organization, Google it. We're taking them head on and have got the hearings going on in Washington, D.C. over those various platforms and the control that they have on those platforms. So in the space of antitrust and anti-monopoly, those are the organizations I'm associated with, and the three organizations work very closely together depending on the sector. Today, I'm here to talk about the work of Organization for Competitive Markets. We are a 20-year-old, almost 21-year-old organization. We started off being formed by America's family farmers and ranchers, academic leaders in this space, journalists and others, as we began to push back against what we saw had been at that time, about a 10-year trend toward concentration in the markets. We are an organization that firmly believes that capitalism must be bridled, that a free, running, unbridled capitalist economic system guarantees that people within our country and around the world will be abused, our environment will be abused, and not unlike your packets that are here today when you got them people over profits. We believe that it's not people over profits only, that it is about people getting profits, that they should have part of and share in the prosperity that their labor, their skills, their energy, their time, sometimes their blood and their sweat builds. That if they build that wealth for a company by punching that time clock, if they build that wealth on Wall Street, then they themselves should also share fairly in that prosperity that they build. We believe in an inclusive economy, an economy that does not exclude anyone because of their faith, their country of origin, or their beliefs in any way. That we believe that everyone should share in the economy that they have. So we believe in shared prosperity through an inclusive economy. And we think to get that done, to have that, you have to bridle capitalism, and that it is government's role to do that bridling. So this, my presentation today, I'm going to introduce you to some individuals and to the way of life, mostly focused, as you noted in your program, on the Midwest. Part of the team, I want to talk about some of the team. Rob mentioned Catherine Unn. She's a rancher from Washington State. Angela Huffman, our Director of Communications and Research, has been just her and her mom bought their homestead that's about 200 years old in their family. I am, as the program says, I am a hog farmer from the state of Missouri. Most all of our team has a direct relationship or one generation removed from the farm itself. So we do focus heavily on the justice to the farmers, and as the opening slide said, for American farmer and their rural neighbors, because we don't want to live in isolation out there in the countryside. We care a lot about our rural neighbors, the workers, the men and women within our communities, and those communities themselves. I want you to just take a look at this slide. I was told not to get into a lot of statistics by my team. So I can't talk about this. I just have to let you look at it. I will tell you that I chose these dates because it starts, I had a short stint in the United States Army, and 78 was about the time I filed my first taxes as a farmer. Growing up on a farm, it's not that you weren't farming and having income, and my dad, when my brother and I have a twin brother, he actually is the farmer. When we turned the age to go to high school, about 14, he said, "All right, boys," he says, "it's up to you. You can stay in school or not. You've got some heifers and you've got some sows, and you can take that money and do whatever you want with it." He said, "I recommend you stay in school," but he said, "You're old enough to make decisions." So we actually began farming probably about our freshman year in high school, being responsible for income and expending that income in a positive way. I think I made the right choices over life. My dad, if he was still here, he would say it was a hard, long haul. But 2007, 2008 is kind of the time I said about had enough of this. And so that slide reflects my experience from the time I began farming to the time when I got madder than hell and started trying to really do something about this. I grew up on a family farm of 4 generations. I call him a young man because he's younger than I am. I note Webb's getting gray hair. His family are hog farmers. 1 generation less than my family. And Webb Davis is on the board of OCM. He's also the chair of the Ag Committee for the NAACP in the state of Missouri, and is a good researcher and a great researcher. But what he'll tell you, not unlike I standing here before you as the ED and the other responsibilities I have, we're America's family farmers. That's what we want to be, and it's what we have strived to be throughout our life, but it's been some of the most difficult times in our life. And while I have my story about my granddad building a home after Grandma burning the house down, she said by accident she put the candle too close to the curtain. Grandpa built her new home in 1919. My dad was born in that home. My dad died in that home 10 feet from where he was born. He always said if God would be good to him, he never wanted to leave the farm, and except for a stint in the military, he never left the farm he was born in. My brother now lives in that homestead. We have roots deep in that prairie soil. And Webb Davis's story, and I have a story of struggling to try to stay on the farm, but as a black farmer, my story doesn't compare at all with what the experience of the black farmers in America is. And for Webb to even be on the land yet and have a farm is a rarity, unfortunately, in America. Webb is a good personal friend of mine, and we work side by side. The stories I'm going to tell you, we thought about talking about the great despair that's out there in the countryside right now among farmers, about the increase in suicides among dairy farmers, about the loss of America's dairy. They're on the verge of extinction, independent dairy producers. We thought about talking a lot about that, but instead I want to talk about those folks who are fighting the good fight. And I come here today to ask you to join us and help us understand our plight and to ask your help as we struggle against corporate power. Because that corporate power not only harms these families I'll be talking about, but it harms you as well. It denies you choices in the market. It strips you of opportunities for equal exchange to market its goods. It strips the farmers in Peru. It strips everyone of the opportunity to have a shared prosperity, to have wealth restored to their land, to their families, to their communities. So Webb, while he could tell you all of the things that have gone against him, how when my dad sold hogs at the sale barn, when his dad would come in the same day, how that darn guy would pay his dad less because he was black. Instead, Webb will tell you, he gets up every day and he fights for justice, not just for the black farmers, but for all farmers around the world. He could live in despair. He could complain every day, but instead he signed up with OCM, and he's on our board, and he's working with the NAACP, he's working with the Nationals to try to get an agricultural committee in every state, educating them about the plight of the black farmer in America. A think tank called CAP just released a paper on how USDA over the years have discriminated against the black farmer, giving white farmers the first opportunity for programs and assistance and denying black farmers the same. Webb is a true hero of mine. I spent a period of time in the Army, and then Webb joined the Marines, so I don't hold that against him for us service people. But later we served together in the Army National Guard. I served 21 years, and 12 of those with Webb. He was one of my sergeants. And we are true brothers. And I love him dearly, and I love his spirit, because it's not one of despair. It's one of, I'm going to do something about this. I want to introduce you to the Peterson family. Chris Peterson's on the board of OCM. He's a hog farmer in Iowa. Chris and his family went through the last farm crisis, and we're in a farm crisis today. In the 1980s, Chris and his family went through a farm crisis, and through the stress, the financial stress, and the loss of the homesteads, and as I mentioned, for when my brother and I walk our farm, we see our dad and our grandpa. And it's a way of life. And unfortunately, Chris's mom took her life over the stress. And Chris could be in despair. And he could have quit. But Chris didn't. You go into Chris's home, and there on his refrigerator, like so many homes have pictures on the refrigerator around the kitchen area, sitting at the kitchen table are former presidents of the United States. Some of the leading journalists over the last 2 and 3 decades have been at Chris Peterson's kitchen table. Much of our business is conducted on the farm at the kitchen table. At Chris's home, this country's business is discussed. And if you ever meet Chris, ask him for his business card. Because on his business card, it says freedom fighter. He will not give up the fight, and he fights for freedom and justice for everyone in this country. And it's an honor that I call him my friend. This is this gentleman here is a guy by the name of Wes Schumeyer. Wes is on the board of Family Farm Action, our C4. He is the president of Missouri's Food for America. This is his dad. This is his son. And this is the newest farmer that Wes loves to post on his Facebook, driving the tractor or sitting on Papa's lap. Wes and his family exemplify a family that works hard to keep the whole family together and financially secure, having a future. One of the few examples left in America of a diversified farm to include the dog Clyde. And still one of the last examples of how that family comes together to ensure there's a next generation that cares for the soil, that's a good steward of the soil, of the environment, of their neighbors, of their rural community, and of the consumers. Wes, I was elected for a period of time in my life in public office in the state of Missouri, and Wes was one of my field ops. Later, he became a state rep and then a state senator. And he took on Mr. Monsanto in the home state of Mr. Monsanto. And over them keeping the seed and licensing the seed and bankrupting farmers and the genetically modified grains out there. And Wes decided he'd had enough of Mr. Monsanto, and he started a national effort on something called the SAC Act, which would strip Monsanto of their patents and their licensing. And it took off, and enough states had filed it that Washington, D.C. decided they wanted to file it. And so there was actually a federal bill called the SAC Act. Well, Monsanto woke up, and the giant that they are, now they're worth Bayer, or Bayer bought them out, but at the time they were the U.S.'s largest seed company, had either bought out or closed down or driven out of business almost every other seed company in the United States. You could only buy your seed from Mr. Monsanto, and Wes took them on. And in 2010, they took on Wes and spent a large fortune to defeat him in his re-election. But that doesn't put Wes in despair. He wears that loss like a badge of courage. He's proud of that loss as he was of any win, because he lost doing the right thing. He stood up against corporate power. He stood up against those folks who are not good stewards of that which they've been given. And it cost him his job, but it did not cost him his spirit or his drive or his good nature about his neighbors or his conscientious desires to do well for his consumers. Wes continues to fight. The point of that is we have to grieve, we have to feel despair, but we have to know there's hope, and we have to keep fighting. We can't give up. The alternative of not fighting is turning this world, the future of our children, our grandchildren, over to the most abusive corporations in the world. It doesn't matter if they're U.S. corporations or foreign corporations. They don't care about the people anywhere in this world. They are climate change deniers because they want to suck all they can and put all the money in their pockets. And we can't stop fighting. Since I started farming, when I started farming, there were 667,000 hog farmers. Today, there's 63,000 of us left. We're not raising many more hogs. It's just who's raising them. It's these corporations. And they control every aspect of the marketplace and every aspect of that commodity. Beef cattle, we've lost 41% of cattle producers in the U.S. Dairy, 81%. 32% on sheep. While we are losing farmers, this concentration in the market, we monitor that as a think tank. Okay? We use a ratio called CR4, and all that means is how much of the market do the four largest entities, corporations, control in a sector. That's all it means. What we know is, while I have an ag economics degree, I don't profess to be an ag economist, but those that are will tell you at 45%, the market's highly concentrated and abuses will occur. And understand that when these companies control that much of a market share, and this is happening around the world, I'm just speaking to the U.S., when it happens, they gain the market and take it over, then they extract more of the prosperity out of that market sector and put in their pockets, which gives them more economic power, which they then use to build more political power. And any of our trending demonstrates, you can just see it as they came in and gained more of the market. And these are worldwide transnational corporations. Tyson's still headquartered here, but it's a transnational corporation. What it's doing to farmers, chicken farmers in India is a disgrace. It's also doing it here to our farmers, but they're transnational. The neoliberals of the Democrat Party joining in with the mainstream Republicans and believing that globalization was the salvation for cheap food. As my good friend Dr. John Eichert says, we have not fed the hungry children of the world. We have more hungry children today. All we did was put the money in the pockets of a handful of few folks who use that money then to maintain their power through political influence around the world. Great to hear Peru's putting some of them in jail. Brazil is too. JBS admitted that the way they took over the U.S. beef market and pork market, they bought out Cargill's pork division, and the way they became a powerhouse was by bribing. This is in the court records. Grand Island newspaper printed it because the main journals don't want to upset their advertising budgets. They bribed 1,800 government officials in the country of Brazil, falsifying documents to increase the appearance of the share values they had so they could then go to the government and borrow more money in order to take over the U.S. market and drive our producers out of business. And they're tearing down the rainforest in Brazil and attributing greatly one of the main factors to climate change. And they're one of the top in the 84. Just to try to make my point, but like my staff said, and everybody said I can't get in a lot of detail, just know what this slide does is prove my point in beef. As we see the CR4, that's the top, as it grew, we see farms with beef cows, the number of farmers were lost, right? Fewer farmers. The small farms, folks that I represent and I think you all care about, we took a nosedive. But the big guys and gals, boy, they just kept going up. They cut themselves sweetheart deals, pay them more money, drive out the competition, and then they rape the consumer and get all the money back. That's what they do. They extract the wealth from the farmer and extort the prices in the grocery store. We call it stealing, but no one's gone to jail in the U.S. yet. But since the 1950s, farmers gone from almost 50% of retail grocery value. So you pay $1 for something in the grocery store. The farmer used to get about 50 cents of it for the production cost of it. Today, it's less than 14% for everything. It's a little higher than that in the beef market yet. Beef is not quite as concentrated at the farm level. They haven't figured out how to do that yet. And here's what rural America looks like now out there where I live and work. The hollowing out of rural communities. As the one gentleman, my friend there, says, you lose the farmers, you lose the families, you lose the families, you lose the schools, you lose the schools, you lose the communities. These pictures depict that. This slide also, I know I can't talk about stats, but just know this is the non-metro counties in this country, and whoom. Because you lose the farmers, you lose the families, you lose the schools, you lose the communities because there's nothing left. There's no hardware stores, as my good friend Webb said, right? You got to go to Walmart to buy a shovel. When the farmer loses $1,000 per head of cattle, that's $1,000 that rural community loses. That rural community lost. Note, and I'm not here to talk politics, but you want to see one of the crises and why rural America responded in the election in 2016. Look at this. All the kids left grandma and grandpa and mom and dad behind, and because the economic upturn that the Obama administration was handled a horrible deal. Not here to, but their decisions on how to stimulate the economy wasn't felt in non-metro counties. Counties of 100,000 population or less had zero net business growth. And this is what happened to their population. These are our towns. When the concentration comes in and JBS comes in, or Tyson or whatever, Tyson has, there's chicken plants in the state of Missouri that Tyson has bought just to shut down and has never sold the land or never reopened them because they didn't want the competition. The JBS does, but that's their model. Get enough economic wealth that you can expend that wealth, extract the wealth out of the system. It's not a shared prosperity or inclusive economy. And over time, rural America has seen 36% of its meat processing business go out of business. USDA and the labor statistics indicate that meat processing and food processing is the base employment for rural America. And it's lost 36% of it. And when you have concentration and you only have one company that owns all the plants in the region in this country, they don't have to compete for wages. You can drive to that factory or that processing plant, but it doesn't matter. It's owned by the same one if you go the other way out of town. And they don't have to compete for wages. And therefore, in rural America, because it's the base, right now, because of the heavy concentration in food processing, the average wage is down for rural citizens going to work at their base employer, food processing, and they make on average in this country, according to the labor statistics, half the amount as fabrication and manufacturing workers, their peers in those industries. Half. There's nothing there for the kids to stay. That's why that line sinks to the bottom. And the workers, yeah, it's bad enough they're only getting half of what their peers are. This was in The Guardian. Oxfam's going to be here later today. So I pulled this out. Just respect their work so much. They're just such a tremendous organization. They did a study on this. U.S. poultry workers are wearing diapers on the job because they won't give them bathroom breaks. Why? Because they can. Because they have that corporate power, that market power that gave them economic power, that gives them political power. And that's how they can treat workers. We're working with another group that's works to try to organize plant workers, many of them immigrants, in the food processing business. And there are some illegals in that system. And they'll pit those families that are here trying to make it, that don't have the proper papers, and use that against the other workers that if they organize, we're going to turn these people over. How inhumane is that? Hold hostage populations. But that's what they do. And why are you willing to wear diapers? Because there's nothing else there to go to work. Because we've hollowed out the concentration of these transnational corporations has hollowed out the economic opportunity and engine of rural America. And if you're going to live there, this is what you're going to have to live with. It hasn't always been this way. In the early 1900s that I referenced, Americans got mad and they passed 3 laws. The Clayton Act, Sherman Act, and the Packers and Stockyards Act. 3 antitrust laws. This is the time frame. know, though, by the time 1 year before I got ready to go farming, which I mentioned to you before, 1978, concentration was down to 20%. And things were booming in rural America. There were multiple processors. If you got mistreated at this plant, you just drove the other way out of town to that plant. Workers' competition works for workers, and it works for farmers, and it keeps the wealth in those communities. It gives a fair price. It ensures a shared prosperity and an inclusive economy. But in 1920, when these laws were passed, farmers made up 30% of the population. Today, we make up 1%. The fact is, there's not enough of us. Wes Schumeyer, Webb Davis, all of us, Chris Peterson, all of us on the farm can stand up and yell and keep fighting, but our numbers are so low that we're fighting against this corporate power that has built the economic power that has control on political power. And so we are not listened to. Our subsidies go to ensure on risk management, mostly corn, soybeans, and wheat. Farmers, the bankers drive them to raise those crops because of the risk management of the insurance and the payments. If you want to raise something else, the banker says, I don't know. You know, if you have a bad year because of this climate change, no, banker's never going to admit there's climate change. I'm sorry. But if you have a bad year, you'll go broke. So they force farmers to be monolithic in their agricultural practices over millions and millions of acres so that there can be cheap feed to feed the transnational corporations' livestock in those horrible buildings where all those sows have a 2-foot by 7-foot space to live in. And when we try to break the lock on that and put caps on it and do other things in Washington, D.C., there's only 1% of us. So we come here today because we believe, whether you're in rural America or in the cities, working together, we can all have a bright future. We're proud of the relationship we have with Equal Exchange. And sometimes, as we've learned, you got to stand for what is right, even if it means standing alone. Be happy to answer any questions.